The dust rose in thin spirals as Daisy Wallace set the last box down on the wooden floor of her inherited general store, her dreams as vast as the Montana sky above Deer Lodge in 1885, but just as unreachable to a woman whose ambitions stretched beyond what society deemed proper. She ran her calloused hands over the ledger books, heart hammering with the knowledge that this small, failing business was both her burden and her only chance at independence. Turning this place into something more than a simple mercantile, Mrs. Holbrook asked, her voice carrying the same dismissive tone that had followed Daisy since childhood. A woman running a business that offers more than dry goods and basic necessities. You'll be bankrupt by winter. Daisy straightened her back. 23 years of hearing her ideas belittled had taught her to hide the sting. I'm grateful for your concern, Mrs. Holbrook, but I believe this town needs more than just the basics. Deer Lodge doesn't take kindly to newfangled ideas, especially from unmarried ladies who should be looking for husbands instead of foolishness, the older woman replied, adjusting her bonnet before stepping toward the door. Your uncle knew his place. Shame he didn't have a son to leave this store to. The bell above the door jangled as Mrs. Holbrook departed, leaving Daisy alone with the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight and the hollow echo of yet another dismissal of her capabilities. She moved toward the window, watching the main street of Deer Lodge with its familiar rhythm men in dusty hats congregating outside the saloon, women hurrying with market baskets, and children darting between horses and wagons. This town had been her home all her life, yet sometimes she felt like a stranger here, her dreams so at odds with what everyone expected of her. Uncle Jeremiah had left her the store after consumption took him, and while others saw it as a burden for a young woman, Daisy saw a possibility if only she could make it work. She turned back to the shelves that needed restocking, the broken window that needed fixing, and the accounts that needed settling. With a deep breath, she picked up a broom and began sweeping, each stroke a small act of defiance against those who expected her to fail. The next morning arrived with a cool mist hanging over the mountains. Daisy opened the store earlier than usual, determined to prove everyone wrong. She had spent half the night reorganizing the merchandise, creating a welcoming space that showcased not just the usual provisions but also the colorful fabrics, books, and small luxuries she hoped would draw customers. Sheriff Tanner was her first visitor, his weathered face registering surprise at the changes. Looking mighty different in here, Miss Wallace. Your uncle kept things simple. Simple wasn't keeping the business afloat, Sheriff, Daisy replied, offering him a cup of coffee from the pot she'd brewed. I'm hoping to make this place more than just a stop for supplies. He accepted the cup with a nod. Bold thinking, but folks around here are set in their ways. People can change their ways when something better comes along, she said, pouring herself a cup. I'm planning to bring in more books, quality fabric from back east, maybe even start a lending library in that corner. The sheriff's chuckle was kind but tinged with doubt. A lending library, in Deer Lodge. Most men here are more interested in whiskey than words, and the ladies follow their husband's lead. Not all of them, Daisy countered, and children need books to learn properly. Well, I wish you luck, though I reckon your time might be better spent considering Marshal Delaney's offer of marriage. He's a good man with steady employment at the mine. Security's nothing to sniff at for a young woman alone. Daisy's smile tightened. Marshal Delaney was indeed a decent man, but the thought of marrying him, of becoming merely a miner's wife with no dreams of her own, made her feel as though the walls of the store were closing in. Thank you for your concern, Sheriff. I'll keep it in mind. After he left, 3 more townsfolk stopped by, each offering similar advice cloaked in concern. By midday, Daisy's resolve was wearing thin, but her ledger showed more sales than any day in the past month according to her uncle's records. Small victories, she told herself. As the afternoon stretched on, the bell above the door signaled the arrival of a stranger. Daisy looked up from her account books to see a tall man silhouetted against the bright Montana sun. As he stepped inside, his features came into focus: broad shoulders beneath a dusty duster coat, a face bronzed by years under the open sky, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples. "Looking for some supplies if you've got them." "Of course," Daisy replied, setting aside her ledger. "What do you need, Mr. Orion McCallister?" He smiled, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "Just passing through on my way north. Need some coffee, jerky, ammunition for a Winchester, and whatever fresh fruit you might have." "We have all of those things, Mr. McCallister," Daisy said, moving around the counter. "Though I'm afraid our fruit selection is limited this time of year. I have some apples from the Peterson orchard that are still good." As she gathered his supplies, Daisy was aware of his eyes following her movements. Unlike the scrutiny she typically endured from the townsfolk, his gaze felt different, curious rather than judgmental. "This your store?" he asked, examining a shelf of books she'd arranged prominently. "It is now. My uncle passed recently and left it to me." "My condolences," he replied, his voice genuine. "Seems like you're making some changes." Daisy paused, expecting the usual criticism, but instead he picked up one of the books, a collection of Tennyson's poetry, and flipped through it with apparent interest. "I am," she admitted. "Everyone thinks I'm being foolish." Orion set the book down and looked at her directly. Something in his steady gaze made her continue. "They think a woman can't run a business properly, especially not one with ambitions beyond the basics. They say Deer Lodge doesn't need fancy goods or books or—" She stopped herself, embarrassed by her sudden candor with a stranger. "And what do you say?" he asked, no mockery in his tone. "I say they're wrong." The words came out stronger than she intended. "I say this town deserves more, and I aim to provide it." Instead of laughing or dismissing her as others had, Orion nodded thoughtfully. "Most towns out here could use someone with vision. What else are you planning to do with this place?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her plans without immediately telling her why they wouldn't work. Before she could stop herself, Daisy found herself sharing her ideas: the lending library, the millinery supplies, the seeds for flowers that could brighten the drab porches of Deer Lodge, the notion of bringing in a small soda fountain. "Ambitious," he said when she finally ran out of words. "But not impossible." His simple affirmation warmed her more than it should have. "You're the first person who hasn't told me I'm being ridiculous," she admitted. Orion shrugged, laying money on the counter for his supplies. "I've been all over the West, Miss Wallace. The places that thrive are the ones where someone had the courage to try something new." As he gathered his purchases, he glanced at the broken window she'd temporarily patched with canvas. "That needs fixing before winter sets in properly." "I know. It's on my list, along with a dozen other repairs." "I'm handy with carpentry," he offered casually. "I could take a look at it for you if you'd like." Daisy hesitated, weighing the impropriety of accepting help from a stranger against the practical need for repairs she couldn't afford to hire out. "I wouldn't want to impose on a traveler." "I've got time," he said, planning to rest here for a few days before heading on. Could use the work, truth be told. Something about his easy manner and the lack of condescension in his offer made her nod. "I'd appreciate that, Mr. McCallister. I can pay you a fair wage." "We'll work something out," he replied, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll return tomorrow morning if that suits." "It does," Daisy said, surprised at how much she was looking forward to it. After he left, she found herself smiling at the encounter, the first genuinely pleasant interaction she'd had in Deer Lodge since announcing her intentions for the store. Perhaps one ally in this town was all she needed to start making her dreams a reality. True to his word, Orion returned the next morning with tools and a willingness to work that surprised Daisy. He fixed the broken window with efficient movements, explaining each step so that she might manage similar repairs in the future. By midday, he had moved on to the sagging shelf behind the counter, reinforcing it with skilled hands. "Where did you learn carpentry?" Daisy asked, bringing him a cup of coffee as he worked. "My father was a wagon maker back in Ohio," Orion replied, pausing to accept the cup. "I spent my boyhood learning how to shape wood before I got the itch to see what lay beyond our town." "And what brought you west?" A shadow passed over his face. "War at first. Served in the Union Army, saw things no man should see. After that, the East felt too crowded with memories. Out here, there's space to breathe." Daisy nodded, understanding the need for room to exist beyond others' expectations. "And now you're heading north. Got word of good land opening up for homesteading," he said. "Thought I might try my hand at ranching. Done just about everything else: cowboying, freight hauling, even some mining, but never put down roots." "At your age?" Daisy asked before she could stop herself. Orion laughed, the sound warm in the quiet store. "I'm 38, Miss Wallace, not exactly ancient." "I didn't mean, I know," he said, still smiling. "Just teasing. But yes, even at my advanced age, I'm still looking for the right place. What about you? Have you always wanted to run a store?" Daisy leaned against the counter, considering his question. "Not exactly. I wanted more options that women don't usually have." "Like what?" The question was simple, but the genuine interest in his eyes made her hesitate. "You'll think it's foolish," she said. "Try me." Taking a deep breath, Daisy decided to risk honesty. "I wanted to study botany and medicine. I've always had a knack for plants, which ones heal, which ones harm. I wanted to travel and learn about plants from different regions, maybe even discover new ones. I thought perhaps I could become a doctor or at least an apothecary." She waited for the dismissive laugh, but it never came. Instead, Orion nodded thoughtfully. "The world needs more healers," he said, "especially out here where doctors are scarce." "Everyone in town laughed when I mentioned it," Daisy continued, emboldened by his response. "Said women don't become doctors, and even if they could, who would marry a woman who spent her time with herbs and sick people instead of keeping a proper home?" Orion set down his hammer, his gaze steady on hers. "Tell me your other dreams," he said. "Every one of them, the ones everyone mocked." His request startled her. No one had ever asked about her dreams without immediately explaining why they were impossible. For a moment, Daisy couldn't speak, the sudden validation catching in her throat like a physical thing. I don't know where to start," she admitted. "The beginning is usually good," he suggested, his smile encouraging. And so, as the afternoon light slanted through the newly repaired window, Daisy Wallace told this stranger her dreams. She spoke of wanting to publish research on medicinal plants of the West, of her desire to create a botanical garden in Deer Lodge where children could learn about nature, of her hope to someday travel to Europe to study with renowned herbalists. She told him about her more practical dreams too, expanding the store to include a proper apothecary section with remedies she made herself, teaching women in town about plants that could ease childbirth and common ailments, perhaps even opening a small clinic for those who couldn't afford the doctor's fees. As she spoke, Something inside her that had been tightly wound for years began to unfurl. Orion listened without interruption, his eyes attentive, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question that showed he was truly hearing her. "Those sound like worthy dreams," he said when she finally fell silent. "Hard ones, but worthy." "But impossible," she added, the familiar weight of reality settling back onto her shoulders. "Difficult," he corrected. "Not impossible. You already own this store, which is more than many can say. That's a foundation to build on." Before Daisy could respond, the bell above the door jangled, and Beatrice Miller entered with her 2 young children in tow. She paused at the sight of Orion, her eyebrows rising in unspoken question. "Mr. McCallister is helping with some repairs," Daisy explained quickly. "He's passing through town." "I see," Beatrice replied, her tone suggesting she saw rather too much. "Annie here has a terrible cough that keeps her up at night. You still have that honey syrup your uncle used to sell?" "I do," Daisy said, moving to fetch it from behind the counter. "But if you'll permit me, I've made something that might work better. It has honey, but also wild cherry bark and a touch of horehound." Beatrice glanced skeptically at the small brown bottle Daisy produced. "Your uncle never sold that. It's my own recipe," Daisy admitted. "I've been studying herbal remedies, playing at being a doctor now." Beatrice's laugh was light but cutting. "Next you'll be telling us you're going to build that fancy garden you used to prattle on about." Daisy felt her cheeks warm, acutely aware of Orion's presence as another of her dreams was dismissed. "The syrup works well for coughs, Mrs. Miller. I'd be happy to refund you if it doesn't help Annie." After a moment of hesitation, Beatrice sighed. "Very well. But only because poor Annie hasn't slept properly in 3 nights." As Daisy wrapped the bottle and accepted payment, she noticed Orion watching the interaction with a thoughtful expression. Once Beatrice had left, he picked up his tools again but paused before returning to work. "You know, there's a woman in Denver who started with a small apothecary counter in her husband's store. Now she supplies remedies to half the city and has 2 assistants. No reason you couldn't do the same." "Denver is different from Deer Lodge," Daisy replied, though a small spark of hope kindled at his words. "People get sick everywhere," he said simply. "And from what I've seen in my time here, you know what you're talking about when it comes to plants and remedies." For the rest of the day, as customers came and went with their usual mixture of curiosity about the stranger and skepticism about Daisy's changes to the store, Orion continued his repairs. Some spoke to him directly, asking about his travels and offering unsolicited advice about the best routes north. Others pretended not to notice him, lowering their voices to tell Daisy once again that she was overreaching with her fancy goods and remedies. Through it all, Orion worked steadily, occasionally catching her eye with a small smile that somehow made the dismissals easier to bear. By closing time, the store looked better than it had in years. Windows repaired, shelves sturdy, even the squeaky floorboard by the door fixed. "I can't thank you enough," Daisy said as they stood in the dimming light of early evening. "What do I owe you for the day's work?" Orion considered for a moment. "How about supper? I was planning to head to the hotel dining room, but I'd welcome company." Daisy hesitated, aware of how it might look for her to dine alone with a stranger. Yet the thought of another meal by herself in her small quarters behind the store held little appeal. "I'd like that," she decided. "Let me lock up and get my shawl." As they walked the short distance to the Deer Lodge Hotel, Daisy was conscious of the curious glances from townsfolk still out on the street. Mrs. Holbrook and her sewing circle were just leaving the tearoom, and their eyes widened at the sight of Daisy in the company of the handsome stranger. "You'll be the subject of gossip by morning," Orion murmured as they entered the hotel. I already am, Daisy replied with a slight shrug. What's one more thing for them to talk about? The hotel dining room was modestly appointed but clean, with white tablecloths and decent food by frontier standards. They were shown to a corner table, and after ordering, found themselves in the comfortable silence of two people who had somehow skipped the awkwardness of new acquaintances. "Why are you being so kind?" Daisy asked finally, the question that had been nagging at her all day. "You don't know me." Orion took a sip of his coffee, considering his answer. "I've spent 20 years wandering this country, Miss Wallace. I've seen good folk and bad, dreamers and cynics. In my experience, the ones worth knowing are those who see beyond what is to what could be. And you think I'm one of those?" "I know you are," he replied. "The way you talk about plants, about healing, about bringing beauty to this town, that's someone who sees possibilities." His words warmed her more than they should have. "Most people think I'm being impractical." "Most people lack imagination," he countered, "and courage. It takes both to dream beyond what others tell you is possible." Their food arrived, a simple meal of roast beef, potatoes, and early summer vegetables interrupting the moment. As they ate, Orion shared stories of his travels. Buffalo hunts with Lakota guides before the great herds were decimated, gold rushes that yielded more broken dreams than fortunes, cattle drives under star-filled skies, and landscapes so beautiful they defied description. In turn, Daisy told him about growing up in Deer Lodge, about her parents who had died of influenza when she was 12, leaving her in her uncle's care. She spoke of her mother's small herb garden that had first sparked her interest in plants, and of the local Salish woman who had taught her which wild plants could heal before the woman's family was forced onto a reservation. "You've learned from good teachers," Orion observed. "Knowledge like that shouldn't be wasted." "That's what I keep trying to tell people," Daisy said, "but they'd rather I focused on finding a husband." "Is that what you want?" The directness of his question surprised her. I'm not opposed to marriage in theory, but not at the cost of everything else I hope to do." Orion nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The right partner would support your dreams, not replace them." "I haven't met many men who think that way," Daisy admitted. "We exist," he said with a smile, "though I'll grant we're somewhat rare." As they finished their meal, Daisy realized she hadn't felt this comfortable with anyone in years, perhaps ever. There was something about Orion McCallister that invited confidence, a steadiness that made her own dreams seem more substantial when reflected in his eyes. "How long will you stay in Deer Lodge?" she asked as they walked back toward the store in the deepening twilight. "Hadn't decided," he replied. "Was thinking a few days to rest the horses, but I might stay a bit longer now, because," he glanced at her, his expression gentle in the fading light, "because I'm curious to see what becomes of your plans for that store, and because there are more repairs that could use attention if you're agreeable." "I am," Daisy said, perhaps too quickly. "Agreeable, that is. There's plenty more that needs fixing." When they reached the store, Daisy hesitated at the side door that led to her living quarters. "Thank you for supper, Mr. McCallister, and for listening. It's been a long time since anyone took my ideas seriously." "Orion," he corrected gently. "And thank you for the company." "I'll see you tomorrow morning." "Orion," she repeated, liking the feel of his name. "Yes, tomorrow morning." As she prepared for bed that night, Daisy found herself thinking about the strange twist of fate that had brought this man to her store. One day of his presence had somehow made Deer Lodge feel different, less confining, more full of potential. She told herself not to read too much into his interest or his kindness. He was passing through, after all, a wanderer by his own admission. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, She couldn't help but hope that his bit longer might stretch long enough for her to learn more about the man who had asked to hear every one of her dreams. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Orion stayed on, tackling the long list of repairs the store needed. Together, they painted the exterior a clean white with green trim, fixed the leaking roof, and rebuilt the back storeroom shelving to better organize inventory. Between repairs, Orion helped in the store, his easy manner winning over even the most skeptical customers. He had a gift for conversation that drew people out, making them feel at ease while subtly directing their attention to Daisy's newer offerings. "Have you seen these quality fabrics Miss Wallace brought in?" he would ask the ladies who came to purchase basic calico. "Finer than anything this side of Denver, I'd wager," or to the miners stopping for tobacco. "Miss Wallace has a remarkable remedy for lung complaints. Helped clear up my cough after just 3 days in those dusty mines south of here." Gradually, Daisy began to see a shift. Women who had initially scoffed at her fancy notions now lingered over the display of ribbons and laces. Men who had barely acknowledged her presence now respectfully asked about her herbal preparations for various ailments. Sales increased, slowly but steadily. With Orion's encouragement, Daisy set up a proper apothecary corner with neatly labeled bottles of tinctures and salves. After little Annie Miller's cough improved dramatically with Daisy's syrup, other mothers began to ask for it by name. "You see," Orion said one evening as they sat on the newly repaired bench outside the store, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, "people are coming around to your ideas." "Because you're vouching for me," Daisy pointed out. "A man's word still carries more weight than mine." "Perhaps at first," he acknowledged, "but now they're seeing the results for themselves. Mrs. Peterson told me yesterday that your arnica salve helped her husband's back pain more than anything the doctor prescribed." Daisy smiled, remembering the woman's grateful expression. "It's a start, I suppose, but I'm still a long way from a botanical garden or publishing research." "One dream at a time," Orion replied, his shoulder warm against hers in the cooling evening air. "You've already accomplished more than most would have thought possible a month ago." It was true. The store was transformed both physically and in its offerings. The lending library corner now boasted 3 shelves of books, with a simple system of cards for borrowing that Orion had helped design. A small selection of seeds for medicinal and ornamental plants occupied a rack near the window, each packet carefully labeled in Daisy's neat handwriting with growing instructions. Most significantly, word of her remedies had spread beyond Deer Lodge. A stagecoach driver had taken some of her cough syrup to his sister in Helena, who then wrote requesting more, along with anything Daisy might have for women's monthly complaints. It was a small order, but it represented exactly the kind of expansion Daisy had dreamed of. "I couldn't have done it without your help," she said softly. "You would have found a way," Orion replied. "You're remarkably stubborn, Daisy Wallace." She laughed at that, the sound carrying on the evening breeze. "I prefer determined." "Determined, then," he agreed with a smile. "It suits you better." In the comfortable silence that followed, Daisy became acutely aware of how much had changed since Orion's arrival, not just the store but herself. She stood straighter now, spoke more confidently, no longer braced for dismissal with every idea she shared. And then, there was the way her heart had begun to quicken whenever he entered a room, the warmth that spread through her at his approving glance, the dreams that now featured his face alongside her ambitions for the future. Dangerous thoughts for a woman who had resigned herself to independence rather than compromise her goals for marriage. Yet Orion was different from other men she'd known. He spoke of her dreams not as fanciful notions to be indulged before settling down to real life, but as worthy pursuits in their own right. When he described potential improvements to the store, he always framed them in terms of how they might advance her larger ambitions: more space for her remedies, a greenhouse attached to the back where she could grow specimens year-round, a work table where she could teach others about plant properties. "You've gone quiet," Orion observed, interrupting her thoughts. "Just thinking," Daisy replied. "About," she hesitated, then decided on honesty. "About how much has changed since you arrived, about how different you are from what I expected." "And what did you expect?" "Someone passing through who'd do a few repairs and be on his way. Not someone who would." She gestured vaguely toward the store. "Not someone who would care about making my dreams possible." Orion turned slightly to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I didn't expect you either, Daisy. I've spent most of my life moving on before anything or anyone could take root. But here I am, still in Deer Lodge after 3 weeks with no real desire to leave." The confession hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had voiced until now. "What about your homestead up north?" Daisy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Land will still be there," he replied. "Or other land elsewhere, but people like you, that's rarer than good acreage." Before she could respond, the church bell rang out, signaling the hour. Daisy startled, realizing how late it had grown. "I should go in," she said, though she made no move to rise. "Early morning tomorrow." "Of course." Orion stood, offering his hand to help her up. When she took it, he didn't immediately let go. "Daisy," whatever he meant to say was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. They both turned to see a rider pulling up hard in front of the store, his horse lathered with sweat. "Miss Wallace," the man called, dismounting hastily. Daisy recognized him as Jack Winters, a rancher from outside town. "Is it true you have remedies for fevers? My boy's burning up something fierce, and the doctor's away in Helena for the week." Daisy immediately shifted from the personal moment to practical concern. "How old is your son, Mr. Winters? What are his symptoms besides the fever?" "He's 6. Started with a sore throat yesterday, then the fever came on fast this afternoon. He's got red spots starting on his chest too." "Scarlet fever, most likely," Daisy said, her mind already cataloging the necessary treatments. "I have willow bark tincture for the fever and a tea that can help with the throat pain. Let me get them for you." She hurried inside, Orion following. As she quickly assembled the remedies, explaining to Jack how to administer them, she was aware of Orion watching her with something like pride. "Is there anything else I can do?" Jack asked, his worry evident in the lines of his face. "My wife's beside herself." Daisy hesitated, then made a decision. "I should come see him. Different fevers respond to different treatments, and I want to make sure this is what I think it is." "You do that. It's a fair ride out to our place." "Of course," Daisy said firmly. "Let me gather a few more things." As she packed a small bag with additional remedies, Orion stepped closer. "I'll come with you," he said quietly. "It'll be dark for the ride back." Gratitude washed over her. Having him along would not only provide security for the journey, but also silence any potential gossip about her traveling alone with Jack Winters. "Thank you," she said. "I'd appreciate that." Within 20 minutes, they were mounted and following Jack along the road that led out of Deer Lodge toward the scattered ranches that dotted the valley. Orion had borrowed a horse from the livery stable where his own animals were boarded, and rode beside Daisy in companionable silence, the urgency of their mission precluding conversation. The Winters ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a small main house and several outbuildings silhouetted against the night sky. Jack's wife, Emma, met them at the door, her face drawn with worry. "He's in here," she said, leading them to a small bedroom where a fair-haired boy lay flushed and restless in a narrow bed. "The fever keeps climbing no matter what we do." Daisy approached the child, her manner gentle but professional. "Hello, Thomas. My name is Miss Wallace. I'm going to help you feel better, all right." The boy nodded weakly, his throat clearly too painful for speech. Daisy examined him thoroughly, confirming her suspicion of scarlet fever and noting with concern the high temperature and early rash. For the next hour, she worked steadily, administering the willow bark tincture and showing Emma how to prepare the soothing tea. She created a cooling compress with herbs that would help draw out the fever, and explained the importance of keeping Thomas isolated from the other children to prevent the illness from spreading. Throughout, Orion assisted quietly, fetching water when needed, helping to elevate the boy's head as Daisy administered medicine, and reassuring the worried parents with his calm presence. By the time they finished, Thomas had fallen into a more restful sleep, his fever already beginning to recede. "I can't thank you enough, Miss Wallace," Emma said, tears of relief in her eyes. "When the doctor said he'd be gone all week, I feared the worst." "The next few days will still be difficult," Daisy cautioned, leaving additional medicine with careful instructions. "The fever may rise again, especially at night, but continue with these remedies and send word to town if there's any significant change." As they prepared to leave, Jack pressed payment into her hands despite her initial protest. "You've done more for my boy tonight than most doctors would have," he insisted. And in half the time, the ride back to Deer Lodge was quiet, both Daisy and Orion lost in their own thoughts beneath the vast canopy of stars. It was well past midnight when they reached town, the streets deserted and silent as they returned the horses to the livery stable. Orion finally spoke. "You were magnificent back there, Daisy. A natural healer." His words warmed her despite the chill night air. "It felt right," she admitted. "Using what I know to truly help someone. That's what you should be doing," he said as they walked toward the store. "Not just selling remedies but practicing medicine." "Women aren't doctors," she replied automatically, echoing what she'd been told countless times. "Some are," Orion countered. "There's a medical college in Philadelphia that accepts women now. I read about it in a newspaper last year." Daisy stopped walking, staring at him in the moonlight. "Truly, truly," he confirmed. "And even without formal schooling, what you did tonight was doctoring, plain and simple. You knew what was wrong, you knew how to treat it, and you likely saved that boy considerable suffering." They had reached the store, and Daisy unlocked the side door with hands that trembled slightly from the evening's exertions, or from the possibilities Orion's words had stirred. She wasn't sure. Inside, the familiar confines of her small living quarters seemed different somehow, as if the world beyond had expanded and shifted while they were gone. Daisy lit a lamp, its golden glow pushing back the darkness. "Thank you for coming with me," she said, turning to face Orion, who stood just inside the doorway. "It helped having you there." "I'm glad I could be of use," he replied, "though you would have managed fine on your own." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but it was better not being alone." Something passed between them then, an understanding that went beyond words. Orion took a step closer, close enough that Daisy could see the flecks of gray in his eyes, the small scar near his temple that she'd wondered about but never asked. "Daisy," he said softly. "Before we were interrupted earlier, I was about to say something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, I was going to say that I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Daisy's breath caught, a mixture of joy and fear rising within her. "You hardly know me," she whispered, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. In 3 weeks, Orion had come to know her better than people who had known her all her life. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're brilliant and determined. I know you care deeply about helping others. I know you've faced mockery and dismissal but kept dreaming anyway. And I know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." Daisy's throat tightened with emotion. "What about your wandering? Your plans to homestead?" "Plans can change," Orion said. "Or they can expand to include someone else. I'm not asking you to abandon your dreams, Daisy. I'm asking if there might be room in them for me." The simplicity of it, the rightness, struck her with unexpected force. All her life, she had assumed that marriage would mean the end of her ambitions, that a husband would expect her to set aside her own desires in favor of his. Yet here was Orion, offering something entirely different: partnership, support, shared vision. "There is," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. "There's room for you in my dreams, Orion. There has been almost from the moment you walked into my store and asked to hear them." His smile was like sunrise, transforming his face with a joy that matched the feeling expanding in her own chest. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he reached for her hand and brought it to his lips. "May I kiss you, Daisy Wallace?" he asked, his voice low and tender. In answer, she stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand, but it deepened as Daisy responded, her arms moving around his neck as his encircled her waist. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Orion rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he murmured, "though I find I don't want to." Daisy laughed softly, understanding completely. "Propriety suggests you should," she agreed, "though I share your reluctance." With evident effort, Orion stepped back, his hand lingering on hers. "I'll see you in the morning." "Yes," she said. "In the morning." After he had gone, Daisy stood alone in her small quarters, pressing her fingers to lips that still tingled from his kiss. For the first time in her life, the future seemed to hold not just her own dreams, but the promise of someone to share them with someone who believed in them as much as she did. Word of Thomas Winter's remarkable recovery spread quickly through Deer Lodge and the surrounding area. Within days, others came seeking Daisy's help for various ailments. Some approached tentatively, still uncertain about consulting a woman for medical matters. Others came with the confident recommendation of those she'd already helped. Orion continued to work on improvements to the store, now with a clearer purpose. Together, they rearranged the space to create a small consultation area where Daisy could speak privately with those seeking medical advice. They expanded the apothecary section, adding a workbench where she could prepare remedies in full view of customers, demystifying the process and building trust. The change in the town's attitude was gradual but unmistakable. Women who had once whispered about Daisy's unfeminine interests now brought their children to her for treatment of minor injuries and illnesses. Men who had dismissed her as a silly girl playing at business now removed their hats when entering the store and addressed her as Miss Wallace with genuine respect. Not everyone was won over, of course. Dr. Harmon, upon returning from Helena, made his displeasure known, accusing Daisy of practicing medicine without qualifications and potentially endangering lives. "You're undermining the medical profession with your herb nonsense," he declared loudly one afternoon, having stormed into the store while Daisy was helping Mrs. Chen with a remedy for her infant's colic. "These good people deserve proper scientific treatment, not folk remedies and superstition." Before Daisy could respond, Orion stepped forward from where he had been stocking shelves. "With respect, Dr. Harmon, I've seen Miss Wallace's remedies work when conventional treatments failed." She doesn't claim to replace a doctor for serious conditions, but she offers alternatives that clearly benefit many in this community. And who might you be? The doctor demanded, eyeing Orion with suspicion. Orion McCallister, he replied calmly. I've seen medicine practiced in cities and settlements across this country, and I can assure you that Miss Wallace's knowledge of herbal treatments is exceptional. The doctor harumphed, clearly not expecting resistance. Well, Mr. McCallister, unless you possess medical qualifications I'm unaware of, your opinion holds little weight in this matter. Perhaps not, Orion conceded, but the opinions of your patients might. Why not ask Mrs. Chen here whether her baby has improved with Miss Wallace's chamomile and fennel tea after your bismuth solution provided no relief? Dr. Harmon flushed, aware that several customers were now watching the exchange with interest. The practice of medicine requires years of study and scientific understanding, not just knowledge of plants, he insisted, though his tone had moderated somewhat. I agree completely, Daisy said, finding her voice. Which is why I spend every spare moment studying medical texts and botanical references. I don't pretend to have your training, doctor, but I am committed to learning and to helping where I can. The doctor studied her for a long moment, clearly reassessing. Your uncle never mentioned your interest in medicine. He didn't encourage it, Daisy admitted. Few have. Something shifted in Dr. Harmon's expression. If you're truly serious about medical knowledge rather than just peddling tonics, perhaps we could reach an accommodation. There are many basic cases that consume my time, which could be handled by someone with appropriate training. It wasn't an endorsement, but it was an opening one Daisy hadn't expected. I would welcome any guidance you might offer, doctor. Their conversation continued for nearly an hour, evolving from confrontation to cautious professional exchange. By the end, Dr. Harmon had agreed to lend Daisy several of his medical texts and to allow her to observe some of his less sensitive cases, provided his patients consented. He came around more easily than I expected, Orion commented after the doctor had left. He's overworked, Daisy replied thoughtfully. This territory has too few doctors, and he knows it. I think he's practical enough to see the value in having someone who can handle minor cases. Or perhaps he simply recognized genuine knowledge and dedication when he saw it, Orion suggested, slipping an arm around her waist now that they were alone in the store. As I did the moment you started talking about your herbal remedies. Daisy leaned into his embrace, still marveling at how natural it felt to have him close. In the weeks since their first kiss, their relationship had deepened into something both comfortable and exhilarating. They worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings often sat together in Daisy's small sitting room, reading or talking about the future. And what a future it promised to be. With Orion's encouragement, Daisy had begun corresponding with a female doctor in Denver who had trained at the Philadelphia Medical College he had mentioned. The woman's letters were full of practical advice about pursuing medical education as a woman, and offered the possibility of a short apprenticeship in Denver to determine if formal training would be worthwhile. Meanwhile, the store continued to prosper. Orion's carpentry skills had transformed the space, and his business acumen developed through years of various endeavors helped Daisy make smarter decisions about inventory and pricing. Together, they created a place that served both the practical needs of Deer Lodge and Daisy's larger ambitions. I've been thinking, Orion said one evening as they sat on the bench outside the store, watching the first stars appear in the deepening blue sky. About what happens next. Daisy turned to study his profile, the strong line of his jaw softened by the gentle curve of his lips. What do you mean? I mean us, he replied, taking her hand in his. I love you, Daisy. These past months have been the happiest of my life. I don't want to wander anymore, not unless you're beside me." Her heart quickened at his words. "Are you proposing, Orion McCallister?" He smiled, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet box. "I am. Not because I think you need a husband to succeed, you've proven you don't, but because I believe we're better together than apart. I want to build a life with you, Daisy Wallace, supporting your dreams and sharing mine." Opening the box, he revealed a simple but elegant ring with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've carried it with me for years, waiting for the right woman to give it to. I never found her until I walked into your store and you told me your dreams." Tears blurred Daisy's vision as she looked from the ring to Orion's face, filled with love and hope. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Daisy felt a sense of rightness that transcended words. This wasn't an ending to her ambitions, but a new beginning, one shared with a man who saw her dreams not as flights of fancy, but as worthy goals to be pursued together. The wedding took place in early autumn, when the mountains surrounding Deer Lodge blazed with golden aspen and deep crimson maples. It was a simple ceremony in the town church, attended by nearly everyone in the community, many of whom had come to respect and even admire the woman they had once dismissed. Dr. Harmon served as witness, his initial skepticism having evolved into grudging professional respect over the summer months of their informal apprenticeship arrangement. Even Mrs. Holbrook, who had been among the most vocal critics of Daisy's ambitions, contributed a handsome quilt as a wedding gift, conceding that perhaps Daisy Wallace, now McCallister, had been right to follow her unconventional path. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the grounds behind the store, where Orion had built a pergola covered with climbing roses, the first step in Daisy's long-dreamed botanical garden. Tables laden with food prepared by the women of Deer Lodge stretched across the yard, and a small band played as children darted between the adults and couples danced on a wooden platform Orion had constructed for the occasion. "Mrs. McCallister," Orion murmured as they swayed together to a slow waltz, his hand warm against the small of her back. "How does it feel?" Daisy smiled up at her husband, still marveling at the journey that had brought them here. "It feels right," she replied. "Like everything has fallen into place exactly as it should." "And your dreams?" he asked. "Do you still have them?" "More than ever," she assured him. "But now there are dreams. The apothecary, the botanical garden, perhaps even medical school someday." "Don't forget the homestead," Orion added. "Not to replace what we're building here, but as an extension of it. A place where you can grow more of your medicinal plants, where we can perhaps raise children alongside your herbs and flowers." The thought of children, little ones with Orion's storm-gray eyes or her own determined spirit, filled Daisy with a new kind of joy. "I'd like that," she said softly. "All of it." As the celebration continued around them, Daisy caught fragments of conversation from nearby guests. "Never thought I'd see the day when half the town came to Daisy Wallace's wedding," one old-timer commented to another. "McCallister now," his companion corrected. "And why not? She's saved more than one of our grandchildren with those remedies of hers. Doctor himself says she has a gift." Still, all those fancy ideas she had. Turns out they weren't so fancy after all, just ahead of their time. Like the lending library my Clara reads every night now, thanks to the books Mrs. McCallister lends her. Orion, hearing the exchange as well, grinned down at Daisy. "See, even the most skeptical are coming around." "It only took finding the right partner to make them believe," she replied, squeezing his hand. The celebration continued well into the evening, with toasts and good wishes from many who had once dismissed Daisy's dreams. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the garden, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Finally, as the last guests departed and quiet settled over their property, Orion led Daisy to a surprise he had prepared. Behind the store, past the new pergola, stood a small greenhouse he had built in secret over the past weeks, working early mornings and late evenings while she was occupied with customers. "Orion," Daisy breathed, stepping inside to find shelves already arranged for her plants and a workbench positioned to catch the best light. "It's perfect." "Just the beginning," he promised, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they surveyed the space. "The first piece of your botanical garden. There's room for more behind it: medicinal gardens, ornamental sections, perhaps even that classroom space you mentioned where you can teach others about plants." Turning in his arms, Daisy kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered against his lips, "for asking about my dreams when everyone else mocked them." "Best question I ever asked," Orion replied, lifting her hand to kiss the ring that now adorned her finger. "Because it led me to the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." Hand in hand, they walked back to their store now, with the living quarters above expanded and renovated for their shared life. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new challenges, new opportunities to build the future they envisioned together. But tonight was for them alone, the beginning of a journey neither had expected but both now embraced wholeheartedly. In the years that followed, Daisy and Orion McCallister transformed not only their own lives but the community around them. The Wallace Apothecary and General Store, they had kept Daisy's family name for the business, became known throughout the territory for its quality goods and exceptional medicinal remedies. The botanical garden behind the store grew to include dozens of species, many cultivated from seeds Orion acquired during occasional trips to larger cities. 3 years after their wedding, Daisy realized her dream of attending medical school, studying for 6 months in Philadelphia while Orion managed the store. Though the separation was difficult, the letters they exchanged during this time only deepened their connection, each sharing their daily experiences and reaffirming their commitment to their shared vision. Upon her return, Daisy established a proper clinic adjacent to the store, working in partnership with Dr. Harmon, who had come to value her expertise in herbal treatments as a complement to his more conventional methods. Together, they provided Deer Lodge with medical care that combined the best of both approaches. Their family grew as well. Twin boys, Samuel and James, arrived in the spring of 1890, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor, named for Orion's mother. The children thrived in the unusual environment of a home filled with books, plants, and constant learning. By the time they were old enough for school, all 3 could identify dozens of medicinal plants and understand their basic properties. The homestead Orion had once envisioned became reality too, not as a replacement for their life in town, but as a supplemental property where they cultivated larger quantities of medicinal herbs and spent summers teaching their children about nature. The 100 acres north of Deer Lodge provided space for Daisy's expanding botanical research and for Orion to indulge his love of horses, raising a small but quality herd that became known throughout Montana territory. On a warm evening in 1899, nearly 15 years after Orion had first walked into the store, he and Daisy sat together on the porch of their homestead, watching their children play in the golden light of sunset. Eleanor, now 7, was carefully pressing flowers in a small book, already showing her mother's interest in botany. The twins at 9 were more active, constructing an elaborate fort under their father's occasional guidance. "Did you ever imagine this?" Daisy asked, leaning her head against her husband's shoulder. "When you asked me about my dreams that day," Orion smiled, his arm tightening around her. A few strands of silver now threaded through his dark hair, matching the ones that had begun to appear in Daisy's auburn waves, but his eyes still held the same warmth when they looked at her. "Not specifically," he admitted, "but I knew whatever you dreamed would be worth being part of." Daisy closed her eyes, contentment washing over her. Her dreams had not manifested exactly as she'd once imagined. Some had grown larger. Others had shifted in focus, but all had been realized in ways far richer than she could have hoped, because they were shared. In the distance, the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Eleanor called out excitedly, pointing to a rare evening primrose that had just opened its blossoms, and both parents watched as the boys abandoned their fort construction to examine their sister's discovery. "It seems our children have inherited your eye for beauty in unexpected places," Orion observed, "and your willingness to change course when something interesting presents itself," Daisy replied with a smile. As darkness settled over the landscape and the first stars appeared, Orion took Daisy's hand, his thumb brushing over the sapphire ring that had never left her finger. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Daisy turned to look at him, this man who had wandered into her store and into her heart, who had asked about her dreams when everyone else had mocked them. "Not one," she answered truthfully. Together, they called the children in for supper, the family gathering around the table in the warm light of the homestead kitchen. Outside, the vast Montana sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with stars as numerous and bright as the dreams they continued to share.